the word agent is so ambiguous that it could mean anything, which is part of the problem. Because then you hear people who say, well, a chatbot's not an agent, but an LLM chatbot is an agent. And it's like, well, what is it then?
Trying to make an agent that does things with purely an LLM and a prompt still fills me with like, not so much fear as just kind of wariness. Like, the longer a conversation goes, the more bleached your context window becomes.
It's always interesting to look at those that were kind of designing conversational AI solutions pre-LLMs and those post-LLMs.
So obviously people are playing with the technology, realizing it's great, getting it to do things, but when it comes to then testing them and productionizing them, they realize it doesn't do it reliably enough.
That's a very good observation. I think that's very much the sentiment of LLMs from 2023 and 24, even maybe today a little bit, is that it's a shortcut to just getting something out there rather than, we still need to understand what this experience should be like.
So regardless of what tooling you're using, get somebody who knows how that tool works, who has experience with it to help, and you will go a lot further, a lot faster, a lot safer. Just also remember it isn't magic and plan accordingly.
Anne?
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you
nice
for
to
coming.
be here.
Thank you for coming all the way from Cambridge.
Yeah.
To the studio.
To sunny Harrogate.
To sunny Harrogate, yeah. Those two words don't often come in the same sentence, to sunny Harrogate. But really appreciate your time and the effort to get here and spending some time with us. It's really great.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about Teneo, about your role at Teneo, and all that wonderful stuff.
Sure. Okay. I'll start with me. So I've been around for a while in IT in various guises, but it was the start of COVID when I first made my journey into conversational AI. I'd just taken a new job at CGI, and the thing I'd been brought in to do wasn't possible to do anymore because of what was going on in the world. So I ended up, long story short, evaluating conversational AI platforms, and that was where I first came across Teneo. I was recommended to me by one of my colleagues, and we evaluated a whole load of platforms, got hands-on with all of the shortlists. So had a really interesting time doing that. And yes, that was where my love affair with Teneo as a product began. After a couple of years of that, I was headhunted out of there to work for a tech and data consultancy called Valcon to do something similar, to sort of set up conversational AI there and explore that. And then after a brief segue back into asset finance, the folks at Teneo finally decided that maybe I could join up, and they had a spot for me. So I was like, sorry guys, but like dream job just called. I've got to go.
Interesting. So, I mean, a lot of people come from a lot of different kind of walks of life into conversational AI. I don't think I've ever come across someone who's come into conversational AI from asset finance.
Well, to be fair, I was in software in asset finance. Okay. So, I mean, it was always quite IT, quite technical. But yeah, just also my background is, my degree was in English and my master's was in medieval literature and language.
Wow.
So I guess languages and sort of how languages work were always a passion. And I think conversational AI was the moment where my sort of academic interests finally met my work interests and enmeshed together. And the idea now of not doing conversational AI is kind of like, I can't see it. It's in my blood now.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the trend, is that conversational AI, for those that are working in that space, in this space, it is an absolute passion, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah.
So what is it that you do at Teneo then?
Right. So I am the VP of Solution Architecture, which sounds awfully grand. But basically, me and my team, we show off the product, we figure out all the cool things we can plug it into, because it's a very extensible thing. I mean, when I was evaluating one of the things I said about Teneo, and I was trying to explain it to people who hadn't spent all the time with it that I'd spent with it, is that for me, Teneo is the platform. Lots of other people have products, but Teneo is very much designed, architected, and as extensible in the way that a platform is. So when you're trying to do things at an enterprise level, it really is a very clever thing. I mean, the folks that make it have been in business since 2001. Obviously, I don't think the product necessarily has its DNA going all the way back, but the knowledge and the sort of the intellectual capital of all those early things, that they did the first chatbot for IKEA, Anna, back in the day. And so I think every evolution of Teneo has kind of built on that sort of deep understanding of how people actually use these tools, and also how people actually have conversations, and the twists and the turns and the irritating things that people do, like interrupting in the middle of a perfectly sensible thing to go off and do something else and then want to come back. And like, there's just a lot of really clever stuff that shows that sort of that history. And so, yeah, my team, we demonstrate the product, we help run proof of concepts and pilots for potential new customers so that they can really understand what it can do for them. Because I think people who are new to conversational AI sometimes really struggle with that bit. It's just like, I know I want to do some AI. I know I'd like to automate some things. Where do I even start? And that's where me and my marvelous team come in. I'll give them a plug while I'm on.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I've known Teneo for a long time, and it's always been one of those kind of like, I would say, like original platforms, you know.
Yeah, the OG.
It's an OG, exactly. Yeah, I've had Per on the show before. He's a really smart guy. So yeah, it's interesting. But it's interesting how, you know, what is a kind of a boon, if you like, for the companies like Teneo. Since 2022, and ChatGPT has become very popular. That means that AI is now a conversation for the boardroom. Yet the development of it still seems to be immature. So, as you alluded to there, a client or a prospect comes up to Teneo, and it's like, we want to do something with AI, and like, that's great because there's interest. But at the same time, it's like, well, what? So you're almost starting right from the very beginning to try and build out a strategy. Is that what you're seeing? Yeah,
I mean, I remember the days pre the explosion of ChatGPT into the public consciousness, and a lot of the time people were just like, "Oh well, chatbots, they don't work. They're all rubbish." And I would sigh, as I always did, and go, "Yes, there's a lot of very bad conversation design in the world. Please don't blame every tool for that." And now you've got all of these people thinking, "Yes, of course it works. It's great." But also, I think a lot of them now think it's kind of magic. And that's a problem too, because then they don't realize that if you want it to do what you want it to do, as opposed to just chat to you conversationally, and it doesn't matter if it gets a few things wrong, like in a business context, that's not okay. And so I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, I can just plug the equivalent of GPT in, and that's my project done. Hurrah. And I think those of us in the industry obviously know it's not. It's not. That's not quite an accurate statement. Like, it's brilliant stuff, but it's not the whole answer all by itself.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference. And if you look at, you know, there's other platforms out there that have come along since Teneo, and what's very interesting, I find at least, is that even if you look at OpenAI, I think we can pick on OpenAI because they're big enough they can take it.
I think they can take it. I mean, you might want to worry about the lawyers, but sure.
Yeah. But if you look at OpenAI's Agentic platform that was released recently, the first example of a demo agent that they show in the platform is one that takes an utterance, classifies it, and then saves the classification to a variable. It's essentially a rule-based classification system.
Yes. I mean, it kind of feels like they've intuited that they needed maybe some context memory and some workflow to make actual AI agents work, which I believe I've been saying for a little while now, but I'm sure I wasn't the only one saying that for a little while, and I'm sure you have been too. But it's quite funny because we're kind of looking at it going, yeah, you guys, you realised you got there. You haven't got what we've got, but and
it's just interesting how, you know, and even in that, again, you know, I don't want to pick on OpenAI for the whole duration of this conversation, but the platform that is there, kind of like coming out to the world as this is our agentic platform. The demonstration that's provided, which is this is how it should be done, surely. That demonstration consists of an agent that just does classification. So the user says something.
Yeah.
it takes what you've said and it saves it to one of X number of variables. The X number of variables are your intents. The utterance is being classified and matched to an intent. The intent or the variable is then what takes the next action and decides where it goes. For me, that isn't an agent, yet it's called an agent. That's one agent in this broader agent system, which kind of brings us to the kind of question of what is an AI agent?
Oh, yeah. Now this is a subject of much debate, isn't it? And I think a lot of people are labeling things as agents to kind of make up for shortcomings in the software. So I hear people talking about orchestration in particular in relation to agents, meaning agents handing you off from one agent to another agent to another agent. And I'm like, I don't really feel like that's what I would want as a consumer. If you know, it sounds very cool, but actually if you go back to thinking about what the poor end customer is going to experience of all of this, I'm talking to an agent, and then it needs to talk to another agent, and it needs to talk to another agent, and I'm visibly, palpably handed off in that chain. The same thing. It's because I think people are trying to use LLMs beyond their natural usage. They're trying to twist them into things they're not. So instead of just being excited about what a marvelous tool they are for the things that they do really, really well, they're trying to make them be agents all by themselves. At which point, then you just have to have, you know, several so that you can have a bit more control. And you have to have the variables, and you have to have all of the other pieces to try and actually make it work. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, an AI agent would have to have two things. Hopefully some agency. Like it's kind of implied in the word. And certainly it's definitely present in the word agentic, which again, we hear used so much. And I feel like there was so much talk about AI washing, but I think it's agentic AI washing at this point, where people are saying, I've got an agent, therefore, ergo, it's agentic. And I'm like, maybe find a dictionary and look up what agentic means, because agentic means having some agency, as in the ability to make some independent decisions and take some actions. And if it doesn't do that, then it most definitely is not passing the definition for agentic. So agentic needs to be able to remember stuff. It needs to be able to take some decisions. It needs to be able to probably apply a strategy, follow a process for a particular set of actions so that it will actually, you know, stay on script and do what it's supposed to do. And that doesn't mean that an LLM isn't in that mix somewhere. It can probably help with all of those steps, but you can't just, you know, you can't just ask it to be an agent and give it a really long prompt and hope. I mean, you can, but we've all seen where those headlines, you know, come up.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna name and shame. We all know. The haiku in particular hasn't been forgotten, but yeah, I think that's the thing. I think people are either going, well, I'm gonna have to have like hundreds of different agents because otherwise I can't make it work. Well, actually, what you really want is one agent front of house, and if that agent is able to then do, you know, good old-fashioned integrations sometimes. Not everyone is going to want to expose their back-end systems to an MCP-enabled large language model for data security reasons, for all sorts of good reasons. Even just the practicality of doing it, the cost and time of doing it. You've already got these well-established API layers. You know, why not just be able to have your agent able to talk to things via API when it needs to, talk to different large language models when it needs to. Again, I wouldn't be betting the farm on a single one at the moment. And then the user experience is you're talking to one person, but under the covers that could be talking to all sorts of different things, and that's our view of what an agent is.
Yeah. I think that the interesting part of that is, you know, if an agent has agency, therefore that equates to a degree of autonomy, which means that it is able to construct its own version of a plan for something. Then I suppose where I get confused is that I did a load of research at the beginning of this year, and I published an article called something like I can't remember what it was called, the definition of an agent or something like that, and it was going back to like the research and writings and publications from like the 70s and the 80s all around software agents and what they are and their qualities and stuff like that. And then I kind of brought that back to today, and I thought, well, the word agent is so ambiguous that it could mean anything, which is part of the problem. Because then you hear people who say, well, a chatbot's not an agent, but an LLM chatbot is an agent. And it's like, well, what is it then?
That's a value judgment.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? Yeah. So it's kind of like, for me, and this isn't to discredit anything. It's like the way that I've kind of seen this stuff morph is that it went from NLU classification and rule-based decision making.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
traditional
pretty much.
chatbot.
Back in the day.
Yeah. to now, it's generative AI. But the thing is that you still, and I don't know how Teneo works. I'd be really interested in hearing from you how Teneo works. But most of the platforms operate in a similar kind of way, which is that you give it a prompt and you give it some instructions.
Yeah.
The prompt is, this is your goal, this is your target, this is what you've got to do. The instructions are, this is how you should do it. And here's the tools that you can use, or the data that you've got access to, etc., etc. And the outcome is reached when you achieve this point. So for me, it's like we've still given it the constraints, or tried to give it the constraints that we gave NLU using rules. Only this time the rules is in dialogue, it's in writing. These are the instructions, follow these rules. So the benefit of that is that you get the dynamism of the language understanding and generation from the models. But the hope is that it sticks to the process. So it's not necessarily making up its own plan. It's following your plan, but it's doing so in a lot more fluid way, which gives the illusion of agency because it's able to handle stuff that a chatbot wouldn't be able to handle, or an NLU chatbot wouldn't be able to handle.
Exactly.
Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I mean, does it even matter what the definition of an agent is? Is an agent when it's just an LLM from front to back? Is an agent NLU still because it's still doing something on its own and accomplishing a goal? Where do you draw the line?
I think both of those things can be agents. I mean, an NLU can absolutely deliver an agent experience. Maybe not an agentic experience, but certainly an agent experience. I think the thing for me is that trying to make an agent that does things with purely an LLM and a prompt still fills me with like not so much fear as just kind of wariness. Like the longer a conversation goes, the more bleached your context window becomes because if you're including all of the either you've got to start dropping bits of the context, in which case it's going to maybe forget things from earlier in the conversation, or you're giving it too much context and then the weight of what you're giving it is kind of like getting diluted effectively the longer the conversation goes on. And so in those sorts of situations, and also just because of the nature of large language models, if you phrase things in a particular way, you get a different behavior out of it, which can also make it very interesting to test as to whether it's really going to stay on script. Maybe it works 99 times out of 100, but the 100th time somebody asks it the question in a subtly different way and suddenly all bets are off. And without some level of like good old-fashioned workflow, for want of a better term, are wrapped around the edges of that and checks and balances in places like the fast food ordering debacles we've seen in recent months. Like I can't even. I'm not going to name and shame brands, but I remember like TikToks of people ordering 2,000 waters just to break. Like nobody would put an ordering NLU bot out there that didn't have some like just classical business rules. So I think, and this is where Teneo is particularly well suited for this. That hybrid is actually the way to make it all work. You need to be able to have that sort of understanding of what the bot is hearing so that you can pull important things, recognize important things that wouldn't necessarily mean anything to a large language model. Things like, okay, if I see a date of birth or a name or a registration plate for a car, I can recognize that those are things, file them away, might need them later. And then they're not just out in the wash in the context window somewhere. Also, if I know I need to do a particular process, maybe the overall strategy is a bit more fluid. But if I'm doing, I don't know, we did a webinar on a delivery scenario where we had the bot. So we had a sort of classic setup where the customer rings up, speaks to the bot, and says, "Where's my package? Hasn't been, it's supposed to have been delivered, hasn't been." Okay. And what happened in that was, obviously the bot checks the system is inconclusive, like, okay, can see it hasn't been, delivery window's passed, I have to go off and make some inquiries. What's the best number to reach you on? And for most people, that's the end of the scenario, and they're still happy to call that an agent. So what we had it do then, and we did this with a combination of hybrid and I'm just letting you in the secrets now. Did this with a combination of hybrid and large language model. I think it was, in fact, GPT 4.0. Just give a more positive shout out to our friends at OpenAI, just so they're not, balanced in all things. So we did that, and what we made it do then was the bot called the warehouse to see where the package was, and we were trying to make it difficult for the bot. So we told it needed to call a different delivery company, like it had been outsourced out for that particular range. So it was like, okay, thanks. Off it went. Made the second call, called the... So we had the sort of framework of that, but the number of sort of steps and interactions and turns and all of that was very, very fluid and being covered by the LLM. The other sort of real advantage of Teneo in all of this is that because you can do that sort of combination of flow and generative, the prompts, therefore, can be super dynamic. So instead of having to have this giant prompt that's like pages long, and also the costs associated with that, we can send only what's needed at the moment for the question that we are asking, which obviously, A, gets you better results, B, costs less, on a voice channel has lower latency as well. And that's where I think, I think it's belt and braces, basically. I think, use the things for what they're good for. I think we were talking before, and I was saying before we got on this, I was saying about one of the things I say a lot at the moment is, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And generative AI has really been that hammer for a lot of people. They're like, "Oh, shiny new hammer! I just want to go around and hit everything in sight with it." And they're throwing out all of the thinking and experience that went with doing conversation before. But it still matters whether or not you're getting the right information from the customer, whether you've got all of the pieces of information you needed to do that address update, whether you've really seen their proof of their new address, for example. And generative AI can really help with all of that, but on its own, it could probably be talked into most things if somebody knows what they're doing. No matter how well you write your prompt, at the end of the day, it's still just a very, very, very sophisticated parrot. And I avoid using the word clever because obviously large language models don't think or reason, and all of the words are equally, alike to it, as it were. It's all just really, really super massive statistical modeling. Very, very clever, but in terms of programming, but not in terms of it's not thinking. And I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with the space, because ChatGPT seems so real and is able to hold conversations, they feel like they're actually talking to someone, which is, and it's giving this misleading sense of confidence, I think. Yeah, and
it's because it's so good at sounding good, isn't it? That's what
yes, and it's that confidence that comes with, I will give you a confident answer, always.
Regardless.
Regardless.
Yeah. But I think that's where you can use it to your advantage. It's like the hybrid model is quite interesting because some people, there's two camps. Some people are well and truly. I think that generally speaking, it's probably recognised that end-to-end NLU is a lot more work, and you're probably not going to still understand the breadth of conversation. So the hybrid sort of area seems to be fertile, but you've still got those that are absolutely all in LLMs. So it seems to be there's two camps emerging. One is like a hybrid, the other is end-to-end LLMs, and it's interesting to see where it's kind of going and I think that the all-in LLMs comes from the fact that it does sound so natural and sounds so great. But all of the chatbots that I've tested, most of them are actually just end-to-end RAG. So they're not necessarily, there's no framework for a conversation in there. There's no understanding conceptually of an intent, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
An intent not as in classifying an utterance to a bucket, but an intent as in my intention as a user, what am I trying to accomplish?
Exactly.
Instead, it's just retrieve some data, give you some data, leave you to your own devices to figure out what to do with that information and what question you should ask next and all that kind of stuff. There's a total disconnect between the customer's need and the chatbot.
Yeah.
Often.
And that I agree with you. I mean, I think if all you're wanting to do is an FAQ bot, then do you need to go hybrid? No. Probably not. I mean, you want to make sure you've curated the contents of your RAG quite well, and you've still done some decent testing and probably got some guardrails wrapped around the edges just to kind of identify when people are trying to make it say bad things about you, or make up haikus. But beyond that, sure, it can answer questions. But when you start getting into things like company policy, or can I get a refund, or bigger, more complicated things like a really complex authentication flow, you've got to think about a couple of things. I mean, data leakage for one, potentially still that's a thing that I think perhaps isn't worried about enough in terms of where that data is going, and is it still being used as training data, depending on what you're plugging into. I'm not going to name any company names there, but also, so that's one thing. But the getting it to stay on topic, as we said before, getting it to actually follow all the steps in a process and ensure that they've all been done correctly. Apply genuinely important business rules, like I shouldn't give a loan. Going back to my asset finance roots, shouldn't give a loan to somebody under the age of 18. So I should probably check that. But that's the sort of thing that they're not really well suited for on their own. And I think that's the key point there. Like appointment booking, brilliantly useful to have an LLM in the mix to understand when you're presenting a list of possible slots to somebody and they go, maybe that one on the like at 4ish, or that one, or do you have anything a week on Thursday? Fantastic. But you still maybe need to have some more, prosaic things that you then need to follow up with that to confirm the slot, to check that that's the right phone number. And is an LLM on its own always going to knock that out of the park? Probably not now. I think the thing here for me as well is that they haven't really got a lot better since 4. That's a thing that isn't said enough.
Isn't it?
But yeah, like there was this big jump from 3.5, and then you can just see the tape. Like 4 was still great, but then it like 5 is kind of like, I don't know anyone who's actively using 5. And there was this push to try and get into reasoning models, which are slower and more expensive, which again for sort of the conversational space isn't great. Like slower for the voice channel, bad. More expensive, also not really what we were looking for. So yeah, I mean, I see that I think the people who think it's one model away have been saying that for the last 2 or 3 years straight now, and it's starting to wear a little thin, at least for me, because I every now and again I'll come across somebody who's such an LLM devotee. They're just like, this is the answer to everything. It's one model improvement away from just being AGI, and I'm just like, no, it's really not.
Reasoning models. I mean, we saw the paper from Apple towards the beginning of the summer, which essentially found that for light to medium reasoning, the standard models actually perform better than the reasoning models. For super complex reasoning, all the reasoning models break down. And for like moderate reasoning, they're kind of okay, but not great. So the reasoning models, I think, is a big red herring in this kind of space, especially for conversational AI, as you said. But what's interesting, you touched on it earlier, is that, when people talk about like agentic AI and AI agents, often that is kind of in preference to rule-based logic. Like, let's take a debt collection use case, right? So someone owes a company money, and they call up and they want to figure out how they can settle this debt. Depending on how much they owe, there might be different rules in place. If you owe us $6,000, we're not going to let you pay it off over the next 10 years, or if you owe us 60 quid, we're not going to let you pay it off over the next 12 months. So there's different tolerance of payoffs based on how much the debt is. And then maybe I'm a kind of person who's been in debt loads, and now this is like the 6th time I've been in debt. And so maybe there's less tolerance for those people because they're always in debt. So maybe it's like, well, for these people, there's only a 3-month window to pay it off. But then maybe someone calls up and they've missed a payment, but they've missed over the last 6 months, they've missed 4. So there's a time at which they need to speak to a person because they might need some help with their debts or whatever. So like even in a simple, or what seems to be a simple use case of someone owes someone else some money, this company is approaching them to get the money, they can set up a payment plan and pay off the debt. That sounds really straightforward. But when you get into the minutiae of different situations, you can't help but have some kind of if this then that type of logic. And if you want an agentic AI to do that, you have to explain it to it So what is it going to do if it's not doing some kind of working out of the rules and figuring out what should be done?
And the point is, it isn't. It's doing predictive modeling. And as soon as the rules get too complicated, then it's going to get them wrong, realistically. And also, if you've got to figure out from what the customer is telling you on the fly as well, the variables of some of those rules. Like you might actually have to do some maths, which still isn't a great area of strength for most of them. I mean, the key's in the name, large language models. Yeah. I mean, it used to be that you could just tell it to think of 2 5-digit numbers and multiply them together. I'm pretty sure they've fixed that now. But I wouldn't be surprised if they fixed that with some code around the edges, though, rather than actually changing how the model works. And that's the thing. It's horses for courses. If you want to be able to, and there's another thing that occurred to me while you were talking about that is obviously collections. A lot of collections are regulated effectively, and what you say to the customer has maybe legal weight as well, and therefore these things are often quite tightly scripted, which is one of the reasons I think a lot of it isn't all that automated right now. And staying on script again, not the great personal area of strength for a large language model. That may be a moment where you do want to go a bit more old school and NLU in places to maybe you're using the generative to help figure out what the customer said and parse out what the customer said. But actually what you then play back might need to be quite carefully worded. And therefore it's helpful to be able to flex and, okay, I'm using generative some of the time for fluffiness, but when it's legal and it matters, I can actually be a bit more prescriptive about what comes back out the other end. And it's best of both worlds. If you don't have all of those things in your toy box, then suddenly everything is just a bit harder. And then we're seeing it because, I mean, OpenAI themselves are effectively trying to build sort of workflow and context memory around what they've got because they've recognized that that's what it's going to take to productionize it. And I feel like if they've recognized it, even the most ardent LLM advocates should be stopping and pausing and considering at this point. Yeah. Like maybe there might be something to this hybrid thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Salesforce, even came big out of the gate with Agentforce, huge announcements and stuff like that. And then Mark Benioff was like, this is going to replace people. No one's going to be left with jobs and that. 7 months later, he's then on the front page of Forbes saying, yeah, no, that's not actually the case. It's not going to replace people. And then the next version of Agentforce captures or gives you the ability to capture variables. So it's like that's the sort of stuff that, for example, Teneo probably started with capturing variables because you can't do anything of significance without them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the point. We have some of the most we have the most sophisticated thing out there, in my personal opinion. I have evaluated most of the other runners and riders, so I feel like I can say that for handling stuff before LLMs, and now with Teneo 8, we have all of. We were using generative AI in Teneo before the latest version, but in 8, it's really now blended seamlessly into the design studio in a way that just makes it so easy and so cool to be able to construct your prompts dynamically based on, like, you've got the sort of core personality type stuff. You've then got the what kind of a thing am I trying to do, and then the specific instance right here where I want to use it in this kind of a situation, and that prompt can be different, and it can have dynamic content injected in from what we've already heard in the memory. And so some of the things that me and the team are putting together at the moment for customers, really, I've shown some people some demos that I'd have to NDA you all to tell you about, but where honestly a person couldn't get the utterance that the bot was able to parse out, but that wasn't pure LLM. Yeah. It was a combination of the both. So we have the ability to kind of listen and recognize things in parallel with what the heck's going on, and then using the LLM to take that and go, okay, well, if I've heard all of these things, could you stitch them together for me and give them back to me in this particular format, and then ta-da. And so it feels like magic then.
Interesting. Well, so I'm definitely curious to get into how you're handling this stuff, but you mentioned there dynamic prompts. What would be an example of where you would create a dynamic prompt?
We have been flirting with things involving lots of mentions of complex product ordering. So in that case, what we're listening for is any mention of products and features of those products in what the user is saying, like big long stream of consciousness. I want this thing and this thing, and this thing needs to have this, and this thing needs to have that. So sort of a product ordering kind of a scenario. And what we're doing is hearing all of the products, recognizing the products as products So Teneo with its own innate capabilities is doing that. Then we're going to the LLM. Okay, LLM, we've just heard these products mentioned. Can you, if I give you this format to put them into, can you stitch that together into an order object for me with the right things associated with the right things? So even though you're kind of referring backward and forward to item 1 and item 2 and all of the customizations I want on both of those, and they're all intermixed, because we're able to give the LLM the structure of we've heard these things, and I'd like you to use this terminology and give me this answer back. It then does a much better job of actually parsing out what we wanted. We can even break it into chunks potentially and say, okay, deal with this bit first, so you don't have to give it too much all at one go. And that for me is where we've been able to do some things that even I wasn't sure until I tried were going to be possible. And so yeah, we're finding a really sweet spot, I think, with that at the moment.
Right. So we did a bit of kind of like kicking the tires and a bit of research leading up to this conversation, just to figure out like where are people that are tuning in, where are they on their journey to adopting generative AI and agentic AI. And the poll that we did on LinkedIn showed that a good proportion, at least, of the LinkedIn crew are in some kind of implementation phase. So that's actually more than I thought, because I thought that a lot of companies would be prior to implementing, but it seems as though there's a good proportion of folks on LinkedIn in the implementation phase. For those companies that are in the implementation phase of agentic AI projects, however you would define that, how does Teneo 8 help when it comes to implementing agentic AI? Well,
to be honest, and not to blow our own trumpet too much, I mean, for me, this is the way you make it actually work and work reliably. And that's, I mean, I can't help thinking back to that MIT study that came out, was it a month or two ago, saying that, like, of all the companies that are playing with it, like 95% of the companies the projects that companies have been trying to do with it haven't made it into production. So obviously people are playing with the technology, realizing it's great, getting it to do things. But when it comes to then testing them and productionizing them, they realize it doesn't do it reliably enough. And that's where you bring Teneo into the mix. You haven't lost the work you've already done, because obviously we can, if you spent a lot of time training your model, fine, jolly good, we can wrap around that, plug it in. We are not an LLM ourselves. We don't believe in reinventing the wheel. There are plenty of people spending lots and lots of money and time building great LLMs. But what we can do is plug any number in to a single Teneo solution, and that's we could do it before, but in 8 it's become so much easier, and you can just kind of just have your LLM handlers, as we call them, for the different ones you want to talk to, and you can decide, depending on the ask, which one's better suited to the problem. So again, if you've gone down the road of training a few models, awesome, we could orchestrate that for you and make it feel like it's one agent, and get that benefit of being able to keep it on a process and wrap it around what you've done already, and actually make it so it does work reliably enough to get it that final step into production. Because otherwise it must be so frustrating. You spent all this time, you've worked so hard, but actually you just can't make it stick to the script enough. As soon as you get it through testing, and then you unleash it on the public, and instantly you have to pull it back again, which again we've seen a lot in the media, and various different, so many different companies trying so many different things, and it must be so frustrating, because obviously it works. It works right so much of the time. I hear this wail, but it works so much of the time. Yes, but so that's what I think. That's what I think we can do, is really help people get that final step to get it there and get the benefit from it.
So if I was to use your IKEA earlier example, if I was IKEA today and I wanted to kind of like create myself like any use case you could imagine, ordering something to collect at an IKEA store or whatever, how would that experience be for me? Like, what are the activities that I would need to do in Teneo 8 to stand up something that I could test or put live?
Well, I mean, I'd say my first question would always be what my first question always was pre-LLM, which is, what exactly are you trying to do? So, like, you still need to have a clear idea of that, because otherwise you won't know whether you've succeeded or not. So, yeah, know what you're hoping to achieve. Then I think look at what you've already got. So if you've already been down that road, don't throw away your existing assets on either side of the park. See if there's stuff that's still useful, that still works. Integrations that you already had that maybe you were using in some other kind of automation that you could expose. And then I think the thing to do is to do a POC, do a pilot. Don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and make an agent that does absolutely everything out of the gate. Try with a couple of use cases. And that's where you can see really rapidly whether or not something is going to work or not. Then obviously get that piloted, get real customers touching it, because we all know that's really where it all begins, is that you need to make sure it works when the plan needs to survive contact with reality, as it were. Like, there's only so much you can compensate for in testing, and I always advise people to test as much as possible, as widely as possible, throw it to as many different people in the organization as possible. Like testing is a team sport, but at the same time, again, there's like anything generative and even anything not generative. There will always be somebody who will say something in a way that none of us ever tried and get some other odd reaction. And that's where, again, I think so much of the piloting is important before you then just toss it live to an unsuspecting universe. You can make sure you're happy with it, that it's giving that level of quality to your customer base, and reliable for real. Able to cope with the slings and arrows of how people actually talk, the ways in which they will jump out of things and not just follow the little happy path and not just do it in bite-sized chunks. Because obviously some of the approaches we've talked about can work on a good day with the wind behind them. But you want to make sure that your thing works like every day, even for somebody who's not a first language speaker of whatever language your thing is in, that they're able to, they're able to be understood, that you've coped with the speech-to-text mishears, which again isn't a thing that gets talked about nearly enough, because poor LLM is going to go, what did you just say? I've heard people reporting hallucinations, and it turned out that, to be fair to the LLM, it wasn't really hallucinating. It was just getting completely gibberish input, because the speech-to-text in question wasn't quite doing it. And so, I can't even remember what the phrase was. It was something really random, like something with like a silver cross or something. It started talking about vampires, and we were like, what the heck? What the heck? And then you look at the transcription and you go, oh, okay. No, actually, fair. Like the LLM's doing its best in a difficult situation there. And that's another thing where I think we really, the maturity of the product really shows, because not only can we identify potential mishears before they get as far as that and sub them out, but sometimes you're not going to know if it's a mishear without knowing the context. So, and this is where having some awareness of the wider context really matters in making these things really work. Because WhatsApp, under certain circumstances, that will get transcribed as "what's up." And that might be right, but not if you just asked me, was it better to reach me on phone, email, SMS, or WhatsApp? Then it's pretty much conclusively a mishear. But you need to know that was the kind of thing being asked for in order to be able to deal with that. And that's, again, that sort of level of being dynamic and knowing where you are in the conversation and knowing the context of the conversation, and being able to then dynamically mishear correct before any of the downstream processing happens is a superpower, because then you can stop a lot of that fun and games before. Product names are notorious for this. Like, they're often either common words or, worse yet, uncommon words, which then get really interestingly transcribed. And trying to solve for that without knowing where you are in a conversation and the likelihood that you might have heard one, like, it can get very messy very quickly, and suddenly nothing works.
I think that it's interesting again how the concept of context engineering in recent months has become quite prevalent. But what I find interesting about that is that, again, it's always interesting to look at those that would kind of designing conversational AI solutions pre-LLMs and those post-LLMs, because the terminology they use is kind of like, they kind of mean the same thing in a way. So, for example, a prompt used to be something the system would say to the user, whereas now a prompt is something that the user would say to the system. And another example is context engineering. So most of the time when you hear context engineering, it's referring to engineering tools and content into a prompt to then provide the model with context. But in conversational AI, context is more than that, isn't it? It's the device you're using, it's the screen you're using, it's the need that you have, it's the previous contact you've had, it's the type of customer you are. There's a whole load of other stuff that goes into it. So maybe you could elaborate on that in terms of when it comes to creating and designing an AI solution. What does context mean to you, and how do you leverage it to create great experiences?
Context means a couple of things for me, because I mean I tend to think of it more as memory. Because when you go back to first principles about sort of what you would ideally like an agent to be able to do, and what it would require to make an agentic experience, which we were talking about earlier, it needs to be able to remember key things it's heard. It would be great if it remembered those for the whole conversation. That's a good place to start. But it would be even better if it could remember those cross-conversation. So as soon as I've identified who you are, that you're a customer I've spoken to before, or even you're a customer I haven't, as the bot, spoken to before as the agent, but the organization knows who you are, and I can get extra information in, and that goes into my awareness of the world as an agent. So then I have a notion of who you are, what you've done, what your problems might be. I know that you were just on the phone with somebody 2 hours ago trying to get a problem resolved. So I could actually be helpful and go, are you still having that issue? Is that why you're contacting me? Rather than making them jump through all of the hoops to try and explain that problem all over again to another person, which is an experience we've all had too often on the phone to real people. So context for me is that awareness of what's going on, but also the structure of that awareness. Like just having all of the words that have been said is probably, if you're an LLM, that is all you've got, really, isn't it? But I think that's the key for me in getting these better experiences, is that actually you need to have some structure to that memory. You need to understand what the things mean and be able to hold on to those regardless of what might be going on in terms of the sort of the generation of specific answers or other bits and pieces in the conversation. If I've heard those things and the customers confirmed that those things are correct, or I've looked them up from somewhere, then I know those things to be real, and I should hang on to those things separately from anything that might be happening in the stream of consciousness. That I tend to think of it like I don't know if you I'm probably showing my age here, but Yellow Submarine, with the Beatles song, yeah. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. That is the inside of the head of a large language model. Yeah, it's like it's all just hallucination. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. People are expecting it's going to remember stuff, when we all know that the way it remembers is by having it shoved back in, and that's again for me where the being able to cherry pick and understand the context of what's in the memory, and that's where it's context rather than just memory. Like I know what these pieces of data are, I also know what they mean. Yeah, and that's the bit that the large language models haven't really got, and especially as you get into longer conversations, then it's the only way it's going to work until somebody comes up with the next thing. And I don't mean the next large language model. I mean whatever follows. Yeah. And I'm sure they're working on that fervently, I imagine. Yeah. But until somebody cracks that, I think you have to have context and memory as a thing that operates with the LLM, wrapped around the LLM, not and helpfully prompting it at points to go, by the way, remember this bit. This is important here. Yeah. Otherwise, I just don't see how you make any of it work.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in the NLU days, we used to talk about state all the time, didn't we? Conversation state, which is basically exactly what you're saying. The context that we've developed so far, and there's certain things that we care about. So we care about if this is a chat versus WhatsApp versus voice, because that's going to determine what we send out in terms of a response. We care about the intent of the user, because that's going to determine how we handle the request. We care about whether they're authenticated or not, because if they're not, we can't do certain things. If they are, we can't do certain things. We care about the information we've gathered so far. So if we've already got the user's address and they need something from us after they've got their initial need solved that also involves their address, then we've already got that, and so we don't need to ask them again. So this concept of state was something that you used to have to diligently create. Like, in this conversation, we need to gather this information, and these parameters matter. I think that what in the LLM kind of world, what's kind of happened is that the concept of designing state seems to have disappeared with the false premise that the LLMs are just going to manage all this stuff anyway. Yeah. So what I'm sort of hearing, kind of as you were explaining that there, is this concept of state management isn't a problem that's gone away with LLMs.
No, and that's, I mean, you said something really important there. It's just like, and I should do different things whether or not, you shouldn't have access to certain things if you aren't authenticated. Imagine that in a prompt-based scenario, like trying to ask the LLM to remember if it's authenticated somebody. It's like, and also then it has to have access to their personal data in order to authenticate them. And if you're passing that back and forth, I mean, I can see how that's going to get into a mess very, very quickly. Even if you wanted to do that with an LLM, maybe you have certain questions you would only answer if the user is authenticated. We could actually have like two different versions of the RAG data, for example, know whether or not you're authenticated and do a different RAG search depending on whether you're authenticated or not. And it's stuff like that. Like, we're not saying, oh no, we just want to stay in the world of NLU. No. Who would? We've got this cool new stuff. We want to play with it. But in order to make it work the best it can work, you put those two things together and suddenly you get something that's greater than the sum of its parts. Absolutely.
So let's go back to our hypothetical scenario before, which was I'm a customer, and let's imagine that I've got a good goal. I've got everything lined up. I understand what I want to get out of it. I understand what I want to measure, what my KPIs are. I'm interested in doing a proof of concept.
Yep.
What are the best practices in terms of the practical creation of this stuff that I should really be adhering to? I open Teneo. I'm just about to build something. What are the best practices I should abide by?
Well, I think with anything, my personal advice would always be get somebody who knows what they're doing to help you. Like, if this is your first one out of the gate, get help. And from a Teneo perspective, that's actually what me and my team spend most of our time doing, is helping customers do their first proof of concept, their first, their baby first steps, to make sure that they really get the best out of, like any tool. If you want to get the best out of it, it really helps to have some advice from somebody who knows what they're doing. And we don't just advise on how Teneo works, but also how to plug it into the rest of your system estate, how to use it to automate other things. And I think that's the thing. So regardless of what tooling you're using, get somebody who knows how that tool works, who has experience with it to help, and you will go a lot further, a lot faster, a lot safer. Just also remember it isn't magic, and plan accordingly. I think that's the thing at the moment. People are thinking that this is a magical shortcut. I can throw a couple of people at this, get them to write a super clever prompt, and ta-da, it's done. And I think the 95%, even if that's slightly hard. I mean, I don't know what their sample size was, but I mean, I feel like MIT are pretty reasonable people. Yeah. So, it's going to be in that order. Yeah. So if 95% of projects are failing, that's got to be because people are maybe going into it with unrealistic expectations of what the technology can do. To have that level of abandonment, it's not even necessarily failure. Like, it's not that the project's failing, because it kind of works.
Yeah.
It's the failure to get it live that I think is the thing that's killing people. And I think that you said there were a lot of people in implementation in your survey. Yeah. I guess a lot less who said they had actively productionized.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's probably where a lot of them are. They're probably stuck in the sort of slough of disillusionment that comes from spending too much time with a large language model, trying to make it do what you want it to do with nothing else. But a prompt and a prayer, as it were. And I think that's the thing. I would say before setting out even on playing with the tool, I would do some education on your people first as well, because it helps to have people who have an understanding. It doesn't have to be like in depth of. I mean, nobody has to be able to sit in a corner and write an algorithm, but to understand broadly how the various tools in the arsenal work, to understand the strengths and weaknesses of large language models, what they are, how they actually work, some of the differences in sort of. I mean, cost is another really interesting one. Like. We talked a little bit about cost earlier, and then I was like, but latency as well. But cost is interesting because obviously right now, none of the big Gen AI companies are making any money off these models. In fact, they're losing a lot of money on these models. It feels like, I mean, I'm not going to be necessarily as hawkish as saying that there's going to be a giant bubble explosion. I'm not saying there isn't, just, so if anyone's playing this back in 6 months going, no, I mean, I could see that going either way. It could be a deflation, could be a burst. We'll see. But I think the thing that will happen and will have to happen is some level of price correction. Yeah. At which point suddenly, if the longer your prompts are and the more of your calls that are pure LLM based, the cost, especially if you're trying to do this at scale. Yeah. It's got to be a factor, and also latency. If you're making lots of complex asks of a large language model, sometimes that's going to take a few seconds, and that's not a great experience on the phone, particularly because you've just got silence or maybe some background noise track to try and make the silence less obvious. We're seeing that a lot these days, I think. But it's still not great because you're like, still there? You still there? Yeah. And I think that's, again, where having a hybrid thing allows you to handle that much more gracefully. Like we can go, just give me a second to look that up for you while in a separate thread going off the LLM going, I'd like an answer, please. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. You can do some much more elegant things with hybrids to make and again, with the cost, like what if you are asked the same question over and over and over again? Yeah. Does it make sense for that to hit an LLM every single time from a cost perspective? I don't think it does. Yeah. I mean, I would say that there are probably things you would want to cache, because why have the latency for somebody who is ringing up to ask you one of your 10 most commonly asked questions just to give them the same answer or something very similar? Yeah. I mean, you could still have like pre-generated generative AI versions of that answer, but then the upside of that is you could pre-curate those and decide whether you're happy with them or not, rather than run the risk that, one time in 100 it says something completely off-piste. So I think hybrid is going to be an important thing for all of those reasons. A, to make it actually work. B, to make it affordable, especially if prices do start heading north, and also to battle the enemy of all voice, which is latency. Yeah, that's interesting. So from your perspective, let's say that you get brought into a company to help them get through their proof of concept. How do you approach? Because now Teneo, Teneo 8, you've got NLU, you've got rule-based logic, you've got workflows, you've got LLMs, generative AI, Agentic. You kind of got all the tools you need, right? Yeah. So it's like that scene in The Matrix where you've got like the racks of stuff.
That's
like,
right. Yeah.
Whoa,
choose your
all
weapon.
of the toys.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've got all of these tools now.
Yeah.
How do you approach creating a great AI experience? How do you decide what to use NLU for, what to use RAG for, what to use generative AI for? Like, how do you approach that creation of a good AI experience?
I think this is going to surprise you as a surprisingly prosaic answer, in that I try to always put the customer at the center of any thinking I'm doing. Like the need to do good conversational design doesn't completely go away. It changes. The nature of the design changes, but you still need to think about what conversations is the person actually trying to have. If you want to design a good experience, you still need to think about, what things are they going to need to know? What are they likely to ask about? So good old-fashioned looking at what people actually call about, looking at call transcripts, still a great way to get a flavor for whatever, for the scenario that you're actually doing, to actually understand what the customers are talking to you about, how they're talking to you about it. Like the best designs start from there. They start from a position of knowledge rather than just an assumption that I know what my top 10 things are. You don't have to have that data and have that data perfectly wrangled, but I think most people have got some level of call recording and transcription in their contact center. So at least getting at those scripts and the scripts your agents use give a fairly good idea, presumably, of what you do day to day. That's a good place to start if you're trying to automate your contact center. But it depends also what you're automating. Like, it's not all contact center inbound voice. There's outbound, quite a lot of outbound voice in the world. We talked about debt collection earlier. That's obviously outbound. Sales and marketing, lead qualification. Suddenly voice is everywhere. And that's where, so you need to think about how your user is using it, what sort of things they're trying to do, what the challenges are likely to be. Will the thing that you're coming up with, again, going back to something you said earlier, channel awareness.
Yeah.
Am I on a voice channel or a text channel? Am I on a mixed media channel, like an app, where actually maybe I say something helpful to you, but also display some things that to help clarify what I'm saying? And I think you just can't get away from actually thinking about the experience you want your users to have unless you don't care about them. And I think most companies do. I think they just hoped that they didn't have to anymore. And I'm sorry, guys, you kind of still do.
That's a very good observation. I think that's very much the sentiment of LLMs from 2023 and 24, even maybe today a little bit, is that it's a shortcut to just getting something out there rather than, we still need to understand what this experience should be like and the best way we can serve people and all that kind of stuff. Because the LLM, as you've said a number of times, the LLM doesn't know. So it's I think that where the trap we fall into is that because this thing can generate language, it understands conversation. And if it understands conversation, then it understands everything else that comes with conversation, like meaning and intent and all of that kind of stuff, whereas it doesn't. So if you want to create an experience, again, I agree, I don't think you can skip, like, okay, let's just imagine, let's just get some post-it notes and let's just imagine that we're a user using this thing. Well, what would happen? Well, I'd do this and I'd want to do that, then I want to do that. And at this point, I'd want this to happen. I'd want a date picker for this date because why would I have a language for that? And, if you just imagine what it would be like, then you can start to say, right, well, what tools do we need? Yeah. And you can start to go like that rather than like, how do we solve this problem with an LLM?
Yeah, because and that's the thing. I think people think, oh, I skip all of that and I get to the answer faster. And I think the answer is you might get into testing faster, but I don't think you're getting into production faster. And that, again, that's what we're seeing out there. I think if you do that bit right, then the implementation can be super short now because the technology's really come a long, long way. And that's the point. By using LLMs and some of the cool stuff that was already there plugged in together, you can then make things really, really quite rapidly. But you kind of need to know what you're trying to achieve first to know whether or not you've succeeded. So it's still important to think about your customers and your users. Yeah,
never.
So I know, shocking, right?
Yeah, mind blowing. Should we have I know you've got some examples and stuff. Should we have a little listen to or a little play around with?
Let's have a little play around with something.
With some real life stuff.
So we're going to teach Teneo something new, and we're going to do it just by talking to it.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Hi there. Welcome to Teneo admin mode. How can I help you today?
I'd like to teach you something new.
No problem. First, can you tell me the topic?
Let's think of a topic. Actually, I have one that's top of brain, given we've just been talking about it for the last little while. The topic is why large language models hallucinate.
Can you give me an example of how someone might ask about why large language models hallucinate?
What causes large language models to hallucinate?
Can you give me a second example?
Why do LLMs make stuff up?
Good one.
And a third, please.
Why do LLMs get things wrong?
Now, can you tell me what you would like me to say first when that topic is triggered?
Large language models don't actually understand any of the words you say to them or that they say to you, so really everything is a hallucination and the term is very misleading.
Great. I'll create that new flow in taught topics. Are you ready?
Yes, go ahead. Right, it's just doing a little
jiggery pokery.
little peddling.
Conversational interfaces.
I've made that new flow for you. Would you like to try it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm now operating in tryout mode. Just speak to me and I'll respond taking into account anything new you just trained me on.
Hi there.
Hello there. How can I help you?
Why do LLMs hallucinate?
Because large language models lack genuine comprehension, they sometimes produce information that appears correct, but is actually fabricated. This is referred to as hallucination, but the term doesn't fully capture the underlying process, since there's no real understanding involved.
Nice. There you go.
But yeah, and what's nice about what she came back with there is obviously that wasn't exactly the answer I'd given
That's right,
her,
yeah.
because what I had instructed it to do when I taught it new things was to generate a few different versions, staying with all the same information.
Yeah.
And then this answer then is not hitting a large language model every single time. And if I ask it again, I probably get it. Let's try it.
Yeah.
Why do large language models hallucinate?
The outputs of large language models are based on statistical associations rather than actual understanding, resulting in responses that may be inaccurate or invented. While this is called hallucination, it's important to note that the models do not possess awareness or intent.
So yeah, that's another of its variations there.
So what's it doing there then? Because you give some examples of some training phrases. So that's fair enough. I get that bit. Then you give it an example of an answer, and then it generates an answer based on your example. So is that just extrapolating off your example, or is it also using its imbued knowledge of the world and its inherent knowledge of what an LLM is to also generate that answer?
Well, I mean, arguably both, because it's using a large language model, amusingly enough, to generate the variations of the answer. So therefore, the large language model itself knows what a large language model is.
So, but you haven't said, look, I'm going to give you this answer now. Only rephrase this answer. You've kind of said, here's the answer, but also just take that and
I've said
improvise.
In this case, I think I've said, here's the answer. Please, give me some variations on it, but make sure you include all of the content from the original one. But obviously, that in itself is a prompt and could be rephrased. Yeah. So you could say and incorporate wider information if you wanted to. The approach is the thing.
Yeah.
And that's part of the flexibility and fluidity of what you can do now is you can kind of democratize the usage of who can teach information to the thing. But going back to the point we were talking about earlier with cost, that answer is now in the bank. Yeah, it's not hitting the large language model every single time. It's done it to produce the variations. I could go and look at those variations and edit any little bits I'm not happy with, and give that answer any day of the week. Yeah, without me having to worry about it or look after it, but then without me having to have the cost of hitting that every time somebody asks it. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do that with questions that are asked once in a year, but questions that are asked 100. 1,000, 10,000 times a day, depending on your volumes. Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. So is there a toggle for that somewhere then, or a setting which would allow me to say, this type of answer I want you to cache, this type of answer I don't want you to cache?
Absolutely. I mean, that's more to do with how you configure the solution. So you can set the solution up so that you have basically the way Teneo works is you can have you have ordering of sort of techniques of how it responds to a question. So where you've got something that you want it to do and you always want it to do it that way, you put that higher up the stack. And then things where you just want it to fall back intelligently, maybe you have two. Maybe you have one which is looking up stuff in a RAG and has a prompt which is designed to say, okay, I found this information in the RAG, give me the answer to this question based on these relevant chunks I found in the RAG. Brilliant. But what if I find nothing in the RAG? I might still want to try and respond, but I probably want to use a completely different prompt. Yeah. So somewhere at the bottom of the stack, you probably have like your RAG-based prompt, and then what we would call an intelligent fallback at the bottom, which is got your sort of guardrails about what you should and shouldn't talk about once you get out of RAG territory, and is able to just kind of try and make some conversation, maybe redirect you back, maybe ask you a sensible question, maybe even go, could this have been a miss here, and if so, does it, what might it have been misheard for, if there's something that we haven't caught, because you can't catch everything speech to text will do to you. And so that's again where the sort of power of being able to do both. Like, we can scoop out the common speech to text issues, but you can also then use LLMs to go, well, okay, this utterance didn't make sense, and find anything in the RAG. Is there a chance this was a miss here? What would you think this might have been? And then we could actually, just redirect that back and go again, and actually maybe give a sensible answer instead of a vampires and Silver Cross situation.
Am I understanding what you've just said correctly? Have you basically just explained the approach that Teneo takes to dialogue management, which is something comes in, the first thing you're going to do is have a look, is this an intent we can match? No. Is it, should we look into the RAG? Do we find anything there? No. Is it a fallback or a grounding strategy? No. Is it something we've misheard? No. Is that how it works in terms of process of elimination?
A way, and this is the thing. It is incredibly I mean, I said this earlier. It's a platform, not a product. So you can decide. Like, if you wanted everything to be LLM all the way, you could still use Teneo sensibly to manage your prompts and make your prompts easier to manage, easier to version control. Again, that's an unpopular word, but still important. Easier to automatically test. So you could do all sorts of useful things with it, even if all you ever wanted to do was all LLMs all the time. But as soon as you start to want to do something slightly more sophisticated, like that kind of hybrid approach I talked about earlier, where you're listening for important things, maybe you know what number the customer's calling in on, and you load some useful state about the customer into memory, but into a structured way. So then I can dynamically inject that into prompts at sensible moments when it matters. Then suddenly you're getting more out of your LLM. You can shorten some of your prompts because they don't have to have everything all of the time, because it's got some situational awareness. And then, yes, if you want to, you can have some things that are more sort of predetermined, if you will, for things that happen a lot. And that, why have the latency and the cost of hitting the large language model every single time? Because you could do it once up front when you're training. And the point is, all of those techniques are available. It's up to you. And that again, this is where caring about your customer and also caring about your bottom line come into play. You need to think about what is instead of kind of being that person with the LLM going, everything's a nail, go back and remember that you have this whole toolbox that you can use and go, okay, I have a problem here. This is a nail. Oh, right. This one could use a screwdriver. This one could use a drill, and actually use the right thing at the right time for the right problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Thank you for that. Let's put those headphones back. Yeah, that makes total sense. So for those companies that I mentioned there that the thing we did in terms of the little bit of research, the poll, so that was like a lot of people on LinkedIn were in the implementation phase. There's still a lot of companies that are not quite there yet, and they're still kind of like, I was actually talking to a retailer a couple of weeks back, which was not wanting to take action through fear of making the wrong choice, and also the market seems extremely volatile, and so whatever provider we choose, are they still going to be around in 6 months' time? And is it too much of a risk with hallucinations and this and that? So there's a lot of companies that are still like not at the action stage, although there's a load that are. For those that are not at that kind of action stage yet, what's the advice that you have around how do I enable my business and prepare it to adopt AI in this fashion?
Well, I mean, I'll go back to something I said earlier, which is education. I think an awareness of what the various tooling and capabilities out there can do will do two things. A, it will arm you better for when you do want to do it, but also it might take some of the fear away, because I think a lot of the fear comes from, I don't know if this is going to work or not.
Yeah.
I've seen bad headlines, and I don't want to be one of those people, but I don't know enough about it to. And also, I think, and this is the thing, I think a lot of people don't know what they're buying, and people are afraid to buy things that they don't know what they're buying, and that's completely understandable. I think, always ask for a live demo. Because I will very, very, very occasionally, if like audio and other things don't permit, like resort to video demos. But I like to show things live because I feel like if you haven't seen it live, you haven't seen it at all.
Yeah.
Like how do you know whether it really works or whether somebody's just cooked it up in a sound editor?
Yeah, true that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. That's not how I roll. It's not how we roll. We're a Swedish company. We really do. We're not big and shouty like some of the Americans, but we do have some principles on that sort of stuff. But I think a lot of people then see a shiny demo, maybe a pre-recorded thing, and think, oh, brilliant, it's magic, and they're maybe being sold the dream that it's magic.
Yeah.
So yeah, get educated, try things. Because that doesn't force you to put it live, but there's nothing wrong with doing a little cheeky POC or a pilot. Maybe do a competitive POC or pilot. Like if you're really, really not sure, but you'd like to be doing something, maybe try a couple of different things, and actually see which one works best, and see who's able to get those results for you. But I think getting your own people to understand what they're looking at, what they're evaluating, what they're buying is going to be the best thing anyone can do who isn't sure, because it is coming. And the people who are figuring out how to leverage it are able to make some really significant, efficiency gains. They're able to improve net promoter score, because actually who wants to be on hold for 90 minutes waiting for a very harried person to then answer the phone? If that person's just been sworn at on the previous call, they're going to be a bit stressed, whereas a bot's going to be like every day's a new day. And so that there are definitely, if you get it right, and the people who do get it right are going to shoot off into the stratosphere a bit. And it's also, I think, going to enable some sort of challenger companies in industries to scale at a rate where they couldn't previously, because they couldn't have afforded the arms and legs. So I wouldn't ignore it either. Like, sticking your head in the sand isn't going to make AI go away. So I wouldn't advocate too much wait and see either. And I think that comes back to the fear about, am I going to pick the wrong technology? And that's where you do need to have an architectural head on a little bit. That's maybe a bit dull. I've just made half the audience switch off, sorry. But I think thinking about something that can interact with any bit of your back-end system estate and also any front-end channel. Because one of the things we're seeing from the big boys a lot is they're trying to box AI into contact centers.
Yeah.
And I get that, because the contact centers are afraid maybe that they're not going to have a business in 10, 15 years, or maybe sooner. But it's not really the right place, because not every communication inbound and outbound that you have with customers is through your contact center. You've got your app, you've got your website. There's all sorts of other, you've got email. Like there are all sorts of other ways in which customers are contacting you. What you really want is your AI to be able to interact with any of those in a controlled manner. Like you don't want it just randomly wandering off and sending emails to people, but you do want to be able to have it without having to sort of die. I don't want an AI over here for my contact center and another AI over here for. So you want to think about that from an architectural standpoint. And also then you want to think about something where you can plug in, where the model isn't an intrinsic part of what you're buying. Yeah. Because the models will keep changing. Like, I mean, we've seen that. Are they getting massively better at the moment? No, but that, there will be another jump at some point, bound to be. But therefore, what you want is something where the next model comes out and you can plug it in. And if the product that you're looking at doesn't do that, if that's all black box, then that's the thing I'd be thinking very carefully. If I was sat on a board somewhere thinking about what to buy, I'd be like, okay, I want to make sure I've got the control to swap in something else later, and keep what I've got as well. Like, it doesn't have to be just an absolute thing. Maybe this thing that I've used a lot and tested is still great, but this new thing comes out and I'd like to use it for this one scenario that never quite worked. Brilliant. I'll plug that in as well. And that's the freedom you want to be able to have to not then be regretting your life choices down the road. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned at the top of the conversation that you went through a process before you joined Teneo to choose Teneo. You're now at Teneo. Yeah.
There's now, I can't remember the last count, but I think Gartner found it last year at some point. There's like 2,000 different vendors in this kind of space.
I know.
There's
it's
loads
insane,
of them.
right?
So, and I think we've got into quite a lot of detail in terms of the Teneo toolkit. But like, from your perspective, either then or both then and now, what do you think sets Teneo apart from the rest of the market?
Well, I mean, I think I come back to platform versus product, and because of that thinking, it is extensible easily in ways that other things are not. It is the most sophisticated in its ability to handle things like interruptions, to handle, I'm responding to your answer, but I'm also looking for these useful bits of information and stashing them away for later. The ability to structure the context memory is more sophisticated than anything else I've seen. The ability to put it back at the start of a session. There's for anyone who's seen any of my demos, we have a lovely little scenario with address change where I get like 95% of ways through my address change, and just when I'm about to, yes, that's right, the call drops, and I ring back, and it goes, oh, we were just in the middle of doing that. Would you like to continue?
That's quite cool.
And it goes straight back to where we were, and that's only possible because of how clever the thing is. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't want to have to try and this was the thing when I was evaluating at CGI. When it came down to it, I was trying to explain to somebody who wasn't familiar with all these products. So I'd spent hands-on time with all of them at this point because COVID, there was little else to do. So I got really stuck in and got hands-on with a load of different things. And they were like, "Well, why are you so obsessed with this one?" I'm like, because if I'm actually going to do a project. And this is coming from somebody who's done a lot of sort of delivery and software delivery. If I'm actually going to do a project, I don't want to have to use any of the others.
Right. That's interesting.
And I think it's also the boring things. It's the most performant thing. It's the most secure thing, like all of the security certifications, and then some lovely bells and whistles on top, like confidential compute if you want to, bring your own key encryption if you want to. Like there's some really fun things. So the most secure, the most performant, and the most sophisticated, flexible, and extensible. And there's just nothing quite like it. There are things that are a little bit like it, but then you very quickly scratch the surface and go, oh yes, but now I can't do that, and I can't extend that, and I just wanted to put this one little bit of like, oh no, I can't do that. Or I have to stand up a separate API somewhere just because I wanted to do a little bit of logic somewhere, and it's a pretty special thing, I think, and I'm very, very lucky to work with it, on it, for it. Yeah.
Nice, wicked. Well, we're lucky to have you join us to share some of your wisdom and thoughts. I appreciate it. Where can people learn more? Is it Teneo.ai?
Yeah, Teneo.ai, or just ping me on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Brilliant. We'll put
Always happy to talk about AI. I mean, it's shutting me up. That's generally the problem.
Nice one. Well, Anne, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. I don't know which camera. Look, there's 4 cameras in here now. Thank you all for tuning in.
Wait for all of them.
And we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks. Bye now.
Thanks.